In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So last week, in the gospel of last week, we heard that by our words we will be justified, and by our words we will be condemned. And so we started talking about the importance of our speech, and we discussed then some of the characteristics of good speech and what types of good speech we can speak. Today, this theme of speech we see is continued in the epistles. In the Pauline epistle, St. Paul says, let your words be seasoned with salt, right? And St. James warns against grumbling. And we heard in the Praxis that when St. Paul went into the synagogue, they didn't believe him, and many blasphemed against the Lord. So this this theme of the importance of speech continues throughout the readings today as well. So we'll continue and discuss together what constitutes evil speech, and if God gives us time, we'll look also at idle speech and the timing of speech, but we'll see how far we can proceed. So what are the characteristics of evil speech for which we can be judged? Last week we talked about so many kinds of good speech. So let's see what are the types of evil speech for which we can be judged. One of them is blasphemy. And here, I know none of us really have this tendency to blaspheme against the Lord openly. But does our behavior, does our action, do our words cause others to blaspheme against God? So we read in Romans, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written. So sometimes we don't recognize that our behavior, the way we act, the way we interact with others, people see this and they associate this with our God. Because we call ourselves Christians, His name is tied to us. And what people see in us, they automatically attribute to God. So if we are not behaving in a Christian way and dealing with others in a Christian way, then we're causing others to blaspheme against the Lord, because what they're seeing in us doesn't reflect our God, but they assume that it reflects our God. So we should be mindful that our behavior can lead others to blaspheme against the Lord. There's a saying that I heard once from one of these Christian groups in one of their albums. They said, the single biggest cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge God with their mouths and walk out the door and deny Him by their lifestyle. This is what the unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. So if we don't represent God well, then others see it, and automatically they turn this against God. Also, insulting or degrading. We talked about in the characteristics of good speech that we want to edify and build people up, but sometimes, and usually this is done like without our knowledge or despite ourselves, we rather than build them up, we break them down. There's a book called Parenting Towards the Kingdom. The author's name is Philip Malak. It's a great book on how to raise children. And he reminds us there that every person is an icon of Christ. So when we degrade someone, when we speak down to them, when we belittle them and make them feel bad about themselves, we're doing this to an icon of Christ. Maybe some of us have heard the example of a person who was angry with another, and somebody gave them an exercise. They put a picture of this person on the wall, and they said, take out all your frustration on this person. Every time you're angry with them, poke it with a pin or bang a nail into the picture. And they did this for some time, and after some time, they took down the picture of the person. There was an icon of Christ behind it. And of course, it was all torn and ripped with holes in it. So every time we take out our anger and our frustration against our brothers and sisters who are made in His image, we're actually directing this pain and anger towards Christ Himself. We have the warning in Matthew, whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council, but whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. I think this gives us an idea of how seriously God takes the words that we say to one another, belittling or insulting or degrading others. Gossip is another one of these evil types of destructive speech. And we see this actually in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Proverbs we read, where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost of the body. A talebearer is another word for a gossip, right? Somebody who likes to speak about others when they're not present and spread the news, right? Sometimes we see this like a badge of honor, that I knew the news first and I was able to tell the whole community the news. Then never mind that the person told me in confidence, they said, please don't tell anyone, but they had the confidence in me to tell me first, before anyone. So I have to let the world know the news that I heard and that I received, right? The words of a talebearer go down like tasty trifles. Actually, in gossip, there are two people at fault, the one speaking and the one listening. How easy is it to say, so-and-so, I don't know about them, they didn't tell me this, I didn't witness this, what you saw is your business, your interaction with them is your business, it's not my business. I don't want to hear news about others, right? In Timothy, he talks about those who are like widows but are not actually widows. He says not only are they idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Saying things which they ought not. What's the remedy about gossip? Simply don't talk about somebody who's not present. If you're having a conversation, limit your conversation to the matter and the subject that concerns you and the person with whom you're talking. If somebody is not present, don't talk about them. Here we cut off the source of the gossip. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's praise, whether it's true, whether it's not true, just train yourself. And we should train ourselves not to talk about those who aren't present. Then we cut out gossip from the root. We cut out gossip from the root. Grumbling is another one of these types of evil speech in James, and we read it today. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. There's a nice story, or a contemplation, I suspect it's not something that actually happened, about a king who was looking for an advisor, a vizier, somebody to be his right-hand man. And so he came up with this idea. He put a giant stone in the middle of the road and hid by it and observed. And he found different types of people walking by. Many people walked by and they saw this big stone in the middle of the road, and they started to speak against the king. Look at our lousy king. He can't even keep the highways clean, and how are we supposed to? And we're paying taxes, and how can we live? What are we paying the king for? What's he doing? Just sitting in his palace, leaving this, and they grumbled, and they went around, and they passed by. And others would come, and they don't speak against the king, but they speak against the nation in general, against themselves. Look at us, what kind of losers are we? We can't even keep our streets clean, and we don't have the resources, and nobody is really taking an initiative, and how come the whole system is like this? And others came, and they saw this thing in the road, and they said, maybe we should do something about it. And they worked. One man, he worked to get this boulder out of the road with whatever resources he could. Underneath it, he found a note written and signed by the king saying this was a test. The king is looking for a new vizier. He wants somebody proactive who's going to work with him. And please go immediately to the palace and meet with the king for your new assignment. So we see here how damaging grumbling can be. We have this tendency to grumble. We see things that are not the way they should be, and we don't like them. We just grumble and move on. Okay, do something about it. If you don't have the authority to do something about it, at least find out whose responsibility this is and ask how you can help, rather than grumbling. Grumbling is a destructive type of speech. Argument. In Corinthians we read, "For you are still carnal. For where there are envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men?" Carnal here refers to the most basic aspects of being like the body of the fleshly kind of things. So this argument is associated with the most basic bodily kinds of things. What do we benefit by argument? What do we benefit through these kind of aggressive disagreements? Look, anywhere you have more than one person gathered together, there's going to be a disagreement. But how do we manage this disagreement? Do we just argue, insisting on our position? Or do we work together to try and find a solution that's befitting and beneficial to everyone? There's no problem with disagreement. Disagreement by itself isn't wrong. In fact, disagreement is healthy. But there's a time for disagreement and discussion to come up with the best solution and a way to do it. And then once a decision is made, we move forward. We agree together that, okay, we had the discussion, a decision was made, let's put our hands together to the labor and to the work and make the best out of it. We'll have a chance to revisit. Did we make the best decision? Maybe not. But arguing just to insist that I'm right and the other is wrong and to impose my way is destructive. It's not constructive. It's rooted more in the ego than it is rooted in the desire to do the best thing to move forward. And another type of evil talk is deceit. This one we won't talk about much. Suffice to say that deceit was like the first sin that the devil kind of used to introduce sin into the world when he deceived Eve. In the Gospel according to St. John, we read, when he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. We know that God is truth, and we know that Satan is the father of lies. So deceit definitely is an evil, ungodly way of speaking. Sometimes we deceive ourselves, not with words, but in our minds. I can overcome this sin anytime that I want. I'm just comfortable with it. It gives me some kind of peace. But really, if I want to, I can overcome this sin anytime. We deceive ourselves in this way. Or this is not even a sin. Or we convince ourselves that what's in our heart is different than how we act. We try to deceive ourselves so many ways, even to the point of trying to deceive God himself. That actually I'm righteous. Sometimes we stand like the Pharisee and say, thank God I'm not like all the sinners around me. I fast and I pray and I do this and I do this. We even try to deceive God himself. And then finally, we talk about being a temptation or an offense. And here I'll focus specifically on being a temptation or offense to our own children. Sometimes we don't realize that our children are watching and listening to every single word that we say. Everything that we say in the home, even when we think that it's said in quiet or hidden from them, they see and they hear everything, and they know everything exactly as it's going on. So when we use the other types of speech, when we argue, when we grumble, when we complain, when we talk about, the government is this, or the church is this, or the servants are that, or Abuna is this, or whatever we grumble and we complain about, our kids hear this, and they know. And when it comes time that we need to rely on the power of those authorities, and we tell our kids, Tab, remember the church teaches us this. Tab, where were you when you were talking about the church is this and the church is that? Now you're telling me listen to the church. Why do I listen to the church now, which is the church that you're grumbling about and complaining then? We've become now an offense or a temptation to our children. We've become a stumbling block in their way. When we speak one way in the home and we speak another way outside of the home, we've become a stumbling block or a temptation or an offense to our children. So please, let's be very mindful about how we speak in front of others, and particularly about how we speak in front of our kids. I know sometimes it's very difficult, and maybe I'm the first one guilty of this. It's difficult to restrain ourselves because we feel like the home is the safe place where I can be a little bit open and free and loose. But at least before we speak, let's consider the impact of our words on those youngest people living in our home. Are we being a cause of stumbling or offense to them, or are we edifying them and building them up? May God give all of us for our speech to be seasoned with salt, that we may learn how to turn our words from evil words to words which will justify us in front of the Lord. And glory be to God forever. Amen.